Good morning and welcome to the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. We are so excited to have you with us today and excited to hear from Emily Taylor. Just my screen. So we will be talking about building a case for support, a robust case for support. And we were just talking about some great examples. So I know we're going to have some great content. Just a couple of housekeeping items today. This session is being recorded and it will be shared with you following the presentation. There will also be a special guide that Emily is going to be sharing with our audience, so we get an added bonus this time, which is really nice. And then if you have questions today, please do put them in the Q&A. We will be answering all questions at the end to ensure that Emily has time to get through her presentation. And then if you want to adjust your closed captioning settings, please feel free to do that in your Zoom settings at the bottom of your screen. My name is Melissa Legowski. I am the founder and CEO of Big Buzz Idea Group. And if you do not know about Big Buzz, we know that many nonprofit executives lack the time, staff, skills, and the funding they need to succeed. Big Buzz Idea Group fills gaps in management, marketing, and event services so that you can focus on the big picture and position your organization to thrive. So if you have outsourcing needs, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to set up a call and see if it's anything we can assist you with. And we also like to share information about our Power Cell. I myself am a former executive director, and when I was in that role, I felt like I had no safe space where I could just talk to peers and really be able to kind of get advice and information. And so we have created the Power Cell where nonprofit leaders can have a confidential circle where they can talk about their challenges, seek advice, and brainstorm solutions in a confidential setting. So if you are at all interested in that program, please feel free to reach out to me at Melissa at Big Buzz Idea Group, and I would love to be able to share more details with you there. But without further ado, we are here to learn about building your robust case for support, and we are super excited to have Emily Taylor of Teeny Big with us today. I'm going to let her share her screen now, and Emily, you can take it away.
Thank you, Melissa, and great to be here with you, everybody. I wanted to just start by, talking about why I think a case for support is so important right now, because I think a lot of organizations are finding government funding less predictable, and so while everything in here is evergreen, I think right now is a really important time to be thinking about how you tell your story to private funders, and this might be major donors, foundations, people who are at a higher giving level that really need a little more to their story in order to understand why they give to your organization. So that's really what I want to be talking about today. And I also just wanted to start with how I define story, because I think a lot of times we can think of story as a Word document or something that, tells a narrative. And really, I like to always tell people that you're always telling a story, and it might not always be a good one. And so to be able to have all the pieces of the puzzle together and to, bring in different sources of information and data, photos, examples, that really helps you tell that more robust story. And so, yeah, let me get started. Okay, so let's see here. So building a robust case for support. I want to just talk about, I talked just a little bit now about why you might be looking for more private funding and need a case for support, but there's also some challenges to creating a robust case for support. And so if your organization is really ready to grow, it needs more funding, either because of lost funding or because you're in a growth trajectory. It can be difficult to show new funders your impact for a few reasons. One, you might have long-term outcomes that take years to achieve, and so those are really hard to fit into your story narrative. You also might have a new or unique mission, and so your impact still needs clarity. You're trying something new and it isn't proven yet. That can also make it difficult to tell your story. And another area I commonly see is your impact might be nuanced. Perhaps it's about changing people's minds or behavior. You would think of like maybe getting people to become more sustainable. Those things are hard to measure. But if you're having any of those challenges, you're in the right place because we're going to talk about how you can still build a story even with some of these difficulties. One of the challenges right now is that with growing nonprofits is funders want proof that your model is making an impact, but you're helping human lives, and showing a change in human lives is difficult to measure. So just as a little introduction about me, my name's Emily Taylor. I'm the principal of Teeny Big. I work with a wide variety of sizes of nonprofits, all through different sectors. And I really think that helps me see a broad perspective of what's going on in different nonprofits. But I typically work with organizations between the $1 to $8 million range, because those are the ones that are really growing and need to level up their storytelling. But I did start in the for-profit world, and that guides a bit of my thinking because I did a lot of consumer research. And what I know from all that experience is that companies are listening. They're listening to consumers and what they're thinking and feeling and adjusting things based on that. And um, while it's not so fun to do that for dog toys or soft solid deodorant like I did for many years, think there's a lot we can learn from it to bring into the nonprofit sector. And so that's what I've, excuse me, done a lot of over the last 6 years is listening to people, listening to nonprofit executives, people coming out of the prison sector, people who are nurses, all different types of people to hear what they think and see and feel from their perspective. So let me give you an example of how I've used this experience to help organizations tell their story. So I'm going to start with one of my favorite local organizations, My Block, My Hood, My City. Um, they had a mission to inspire youth, empower communities, and build a better world one block at a time, which is very inspiring. But there's also some confusion there, which I'll get into in a second. But after 2020, they received a big influx of donations and started to grow. But as funds grew, so did the expectations of to show the change that their work was making. Funders wanted to know their impact. So when we think about this mission, how do you measure, inspiring youth, empowering communities, and building a better world? And this was some of the challenges that they faced. Sorry, guys, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm gonna be drinking a lot of water while I'm talking here. So this was tricky to measure their impact because they would have lots of testimonials of success, but those really only represented the most engaged areas they were working with and individuals. In their mission, they had things like building a better world, even one block at a time. It involves a lot of elements that were part of bigger systems out of their control, such as crime, job opportunities, infrastructure. So it made it very difficult to measure what that meant. Their mission also could mean a lot of different things to different people. When we think of inspiration or empowerment, what does that really mean to a funder versus someone, who's actually receiving the services? But despite all these challenges, they knew their work was important to residents that lived in the areas they worked in, and no one else was helping people on these blocks in a really holistic way. So when I see this kind of challenge of, we see impact, but we're not quite sure how to measure it, this is where I think organizations need to start asking themselves, how do your constituents see the change you're making? The people you serve, what do they see as that impact? How big is that change you're making? Is it just a few people or is it something broader and bigger? Or sorry, that's how widespread. The big is like how much are people's lives changing? And then how widespread is how many people is it affecting? And then also how might this change increase? as you do impact research, it also shows you how to increase your impact, which is really great for storytelling and helping donors see how their funds can help in the future. And so all these questions can be answered by listening to people. You start with listening to those constituents. So, like my block, my hood, my city, if you see your work making an impact and you know you have a great impact story, you just need to learn how to tell it. You really need to focus on constituent centered impact, who the people you serve and the impact they see. So that's where I started with this project. I listened to their constituents, called up people running block clubs throughout the city, and really listened to the words that they used to describe the services they were receiving. Then we were able to use that information to survey and start to turn this information into data, such as what have been the benefits of working with this organization, to actually see um, constituent described benefits and get people to rate how prevalent are those benefits. How do they define commonly used words when we talk about community, empowerment, to be able to hear how they define them? Um, Starts to build some detail around what is going on and what's happening. And then we're also able to take this data and correlate it too. How does safety correlate with the sense of community? Can we show that there are trends that are happening um, just based on what people are experiencing, that when they have a sense of community, they also feel safe? These kind of elements really help build that story of, you're not just empowering people, you can actually show what that brings to the table. So all this information gave them the opportunity to show the impact they were making and tell the story of how it supports their mission. So they're able to use the words of their constituents alongside data and bring those two things together to show some real powerful change that they were making. So I wanted to show you, just talk a little bit about some of the questions private funders want to know about impact. And again, private funders could be major donors, they could be foundations, but people who are thinking a little more concretely about what change your organization is making. But before I get to that, we have a poll. So Kat, if you can bring up our first poll, I wanted to know, does your organization have a case for support? And this might be a PDF you send to potential funders, it might be a presentation, something that tells your story to people who don't know much about your organization yet. So just wait a minute or two for people to vote. And I'll take my sip of water when I have the chance. How long should I wait, Kat?
We can ask people to take the next 5 or 10 seconds to get their selection
Okay,
in, please.
thank you. All right, let's see. Okay, so somewhat. We have a few documents, but they could be better. And yes, for those who are not sure, or telling your stories from memory, I think a lot of that you can get to a certain point where you can tell your story from memory, especially if you're a founder or a smaller organization. But one thing a case for support can do is help more people tell your story at your organization. It allows you to have a story that is outside of your brain and can take some of that weight off. But let me get into those funders and what they're thinking. So, some common impact questions that funders might be asking. What is the impact your organization is making on the lives of the people you serve? Pretty common impact question, but to be able to, this is a question that needs to be answered in these conversations. They also want to know how you're measuring this impact. How do you then show that this is happening? You might have hypotheses about the impact you're making, but how do you then show and prove that this is happening? how prevalent or repeatable is this impact? And so being able to show potential donors that this is not something just happenstance or helping just a small amount of people, that this is going to make real impact, that their money can um, help expand. And so that last question, then how can our funding help increase this impact further? By showing them the impact, showing how you measure it, how prevalent or repeatable it is, and what that future impact can be with additional funding. So I head into building a case for support, thinking about these questions and how you can help answer them. So just a comment, basically you can go in the chat. Is your organization measuring impacts? And if so, how? So if you could put that in the chat, and if you're not, that's okay too. That's why we're having this presentation, this conversation.
I think that's such an interesting question. As you were going through those four, I'm like, measuring can be so hard. I think sometimes, kind of getting to the concrete. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm anxious about any comments that might get added here.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Melissa. And I think I know there's some organizations do logic models where you really have these things defined, but they're tricky. And I do sometimes think measuring impact can sound, people think of jobs created or, income change or, getting out of poverty, different things, certain education received. I think a lot of these things are very long term. And so I want to talk about how we can break it down to not be so big and so heavy all the time. But I
I'm
see a
looking
few things in
forward.
the chat.
Yeah, so one person said that it's a huge struggle. One person's using logic models. Somebody else added that it depends on the program. They have no way to measure impact on traveling mental health exhibit, but they do pre and post surveys for one of their other hands-on programs. We have a really hard time with measurement of impact. We give grants to researchers who are doing work in how to improve hearing health, but it takes years, and so it moves the needle incrementally. And then we measure theory of change, logic models, other data. Um, and then I also, I think it's interesting. I have a client where we are measuring the impact, but the direct impact is so small that often funders overlook them completely. So this will be exciting to see where you take this next.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, like, depending on your mission, you really have to find what is there can be short, mid, and long-term impacts. And how do you define what's right for the stage of your organization? Because some things can take 10 years. They can have a lot of external forces that affect them. And so we have to be realistic about what can you actually measure versus what do funders expect to see as impacts. So breaking some of that down is really helpful. So when we talk about logic models, certainly, there's a lot of nonprofits that don't have them. They can be really tricky to put together, as some of you just mentioned in the comments. But I want to be really clear here. It's not outputs, which are the numbers of what you're doing. Number of people that attended programs, number of people you served, percentage of people who need your services, testimonials. Those are more outputs of your work. Testimonials can kind of go in both of these areas, but impacts are more, the percentage of people changed by your programs, percentage or the number of people highly rating your services, percentage of people who want your services versus need your services, and the numbers behind the stories. So when we have testimonials, can we also put numbers to show the broadness of what people are saying? So I just want you to be thinking about that, because a lot of times I see nonprofits using outputs as impacts, and a very educated funder is going to want more. So let me talk about some of the tensions that I think I heard in the chat here. Finding those impacts can be a challenge for organizations because your organization's outcomes might be long-term and take years to show up as impacts. But your organization needs funding today. This is a tough year and you need funding this year. It might also be a challenge because funders want to know specifically what impact your work has beyond outputs and testimonials, but your organization focuses on behavior change or something that's happening in the head that is sort of harder to measure. It might have a lot of different influences based on what people read, who they're interacting with, and those things are out of your control. And lastly, another tension is your organization might be trying new things. The social sector exists because people have not solved the problems that you're working on. And so you might be trying something new, and reliable outcomes haven't been proven for your work yet. And so you're not quite sure what to measure or how to show the proof of your work, or make changes because you are trying something new and make changes to improve it. So going back to storytelling, you may have seen this statistic around, but the Stanford Graduate School of Business, the stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. But stories aren't just words. They need to paint a clear picture for your audience. And this goes back to you are always telling a story. You just might not be telling the best story. So I have developed 5 elements for telling strong impact stories. And I'm going to go through them with some examples, but this is also the guide that Melissa mentioned I have for you will help walk you through how you can gather this information for your own organization. So the first element is context. What is like the situation that is going on that people, funders might not understand. It's especially true for private donors. They might not understand, the healthcare system. They might not understand the foster care system and what actually happens versus what they think happens. And so to be able to bring the history of the challenge, the history of your organization, why now it is important to address some of these challenges is really important. So these are just some examples from some of my clients. We're founded in 1893 to address the changing needs of immigrants in our community. Our neighbors are rent burdened, average of half the income of surrounding neighborhoods, and struggle to provide basic needs for their families. With over 35,000 newly arrived immigrants arriving in our city over the last 2 years, this community is in dire need of support. So this helps set the stage of this organization's been around a long time, the challenge that residents are facing, and this added, like right now, they're dealing with a huge influx of people that are just going to add to this challenge. The second element is approach. And this is really like, why is your organization unique? There may be other organizations out there like you in different parts of the city and different states, but they're different from yours. So what values do you bring? What vision do you have? What programs do you feel like are going to best serve your mission? So just as an example, this is an organization that does affordable housing. We envision a city where people can build a more secure and self-sufficient lives through the provision of decent, affordable housing, essential supportive services, asset building programs, and educational and employment opportunities. Other values are creativity, being collaborative, trustworthy, and compassionate. There's more that goes into this story, but this is just an example of showing how this organization, what they envision for the people in their city, as well as the unique approach that they bring to the table. The third area is action. So this is usually a great way, everyone has they're doing something. How can you show and tell what's happening? So this can be those outputs that I mentioned earlier. That is certainly, well, it's not impacts, it's certainly great information to also share. Oh, sorry, My phone was ringing. Video or photos of the work being done, because you have to remember, funders are not on the ground. They do not, they might be sitting in a boring old office somewhere. They do not know what's happening. And so to be able to show them not only tells them that you're doing something, but it also brings them closer to the work. So program A, we served 1,966 unique households in our community through our food pantry in 2024 and hold an annual health fair with our service partners. And here you can see, people getting fresh food, getting clothing, getting haircuts. It just takes the funder more onto the ground, because remember, they are very far away from the work that you're doing quite often. Number 4 is impact. So this is a really, can be a big area, and we talked about some of the challenges along with it, but this can include stories from the people you serve, feedback, positive feedback about, what they're experiencing. It can mean successes, policy successes or changes that have been made that help the people you serve, testimonials, as well as measured change. How are you showing that you are changing these lives? And they can be backed up by some of these stories and testimonials to, again, show the depth and breadth of your work. So this might be, a survey or some other way to gather data. Like 85% of participants said their experiences at our program helped them to be more open-minded when interacting with people not like them. And then this the statistic combined with a quote that helps take somebody to a perspective of someone who would have answered, in this 85% range. And you can see this is a impact that isn't getting a job. It isn't like a huge, it's a mental shift, but we're able to measure it and show it to a funder. And then lastly, and I would say almost most importantly, is the opportunity. And what I mean by opportunity is the opportunity for a funder to be part of your work, be a part of your mission and impact. So this might be what your plans are for funding, anticipated change that you hope to see with their funding. There's also a call to action, rather than an open-ended, do what you can. What do you really need, and what do you hope to get from this funder, so they know how they can fit into that puzzle. So with your support of a $25,000 gift, we can finalize the construction on our new 31,000 square foot building. Very specific. They might not be able to make that whole amount, but it's really clear what is needed. And if they can, if they want to support and they can support, it is a clear amount there that they can. So those are the 5 areas of storytelling. And I wanted to just put up another poll. When you look at those 5, where do you feel like your organization might have the most gaps? Because a lot of times we have a lot of this information, and there's other times where it just doesn't exist or we're not telling it to people. So take a moment to fill in which of these 5 categories you feel like you might need the most work. And as we wait, I'll tell the story that I was telling Melissa and the team before our call. I was recently doing an assessment of a case for support for an organization last week that works in domestic violence. And we found they were a new organization, so they really didn't have a lot of impacts to measure, but they can still tell a story around it. So for instance, they were trying to raise money for a building. They were currently helping people experiencing domestic violence by putting them in hotels, and they were trying to fund a building so that they could house people within their own facility, which is huge. It's a big expense. It's a big undertaking. But one of the things that they did not have in their case for support was that currently it takes 3 to 5 days to get someone into a hotel room when they need it. And with a building, they could get someone into a space immediately. And so that 3 to 5 days in someone experiencing domestic violence and calling for help was huge. That was life or death for a woman that was in this situation. And so by missing that information, they were really missing a big part of their story that allows funders to see how they can help. All right, so looking at this poll where you might have gaps, and people are pretty even across. All right, so context is seems like everyone feels solid on, but approach, impact, and the opportunity. Yeah, and these are things, I think those are probably the most common I see missed in a case for support, um, because we're so good at telling our history and what we're doing, but maybe not so much around what's unique to our organization and the impact you can make, as well as how someone can help. So let's keep going here. So I would say, I know you guys kind of vote across the board, but the area that I see organizations really struggling with the most is impact. And I think just going back to the poll we had, or the comments we had earlier, impact can be the hardest one to measure. But when you can measure it, even if it's a short-term impact leading to a long-term impact, that really helps set your organization, gets your organization noticed, helps everything click for a funder. And so I wanted to just dive in a little bit more with an example, with a case study that helps frame constituent impact, or helps frame impact from a constituent lens, from a people you serve lens. So there's an organization called the JAR. It's a unique arts organization that was looking to increase human connection and reduce polarity. Something, not typical, a little outside the box, but doing really great, amazing work. They were a newer organization, around 5 years old when I started working with them. And they'd gotten by calling themselves experimental. They were trying something new, bringing art performance and conversation as a way to help people expand their thinking of people different than them and build human connection. But it was experimental. They weren't exactly sure what impact they were making, and they really needed to do that in order to grow the next level. They couldn't get by on being an experiment for too long. They had really great video testimonials of people who had experienced their programs, but it wasn't really enough to prove that breadth of impact beyond a few individuals. People can't watch 50 videos of people's experiences, so they needed to find a way to get their impact more succinct. They had a lot of theories about the change they were making, but they really didn't have the evidence of it. So when I started working with them, we went through these 3 stages. One, we developed constituent-centered impact language through listening. I helped them listen to a variety of the people that were attending their programs. We were able to hear what they felt like the impact was, the language they used around their impact. We then measured this impact through surveys. And one of the great things is, because we're able to frame this survey in their language. I know some of you mentioned you're doing pre and post program surveys, which is great. But when you can frame something in their language, it can really help people identify with it sooner. Rather than, I don't know why I keep going back to this job thing, but rather than saying, did we help you get a job? Yes, no is very different question than, did we give you the confidence and tools to get, to apply for jobs, to get a job, however it might be. But you're sort of articulating their perspective of the impact versus putting what you think funders want to hear and framing the question that way. We're then able to share these stats and stories from the conversations with funders. So measuring impact with constituents, just as an example of a question that was framed from a constituent lens, in this idea of reduced polarization, my experiences with the jar gave me chances to have more authentic, connected conversations with people, and how big of an effect that was. You can see almost 90% of people rated this as like a 5 to a 10 as a change in their lives, which is really amazing. And because of the way the question is framed, people really connected with it. It wasn't sort of just, do you know more people? Do you have more friends? It's really framed in a way that they articulated. And then we're able to pair that with quotes that help support and bring those individuals to life. We're also then took all these elements and put them into a story. And so I'm not sharing one story here because these 5 elements can fit into a wide variety of ways to tell a story. So 2 ways the jar used this impact was creating a PDF of the changes they were making, the data that we gathered, photos of what was going on, the context of what they were doing, and put that in a PDF they could share with funders. And then we also did a short video where I walked through some of the impacts that were made as sort of a third party sharing those impacts. And so when you think about your 5 elements, they can come together in a variety of ways. It's more just about how are you telling that complete story. So once we were able to do this work, the organization had started where they couldn't clearly articulate their impact. A lot of that was based off theoretical ideas and what they thought should be happening based on their work. And they also shifted depending on the funder. So because their work was a little amorphous, they might tell a story one way to a spiritual funder and tell a story another way to an arts funder. Once we were able to do this work, they were able to share their impacts based on real changes seen by participants. They're backed by stories participants told an objective interviewer. And they stayed true to the mission, no matter the funder. What was so cool is that this organization actually got funded through 2 different streams of one organization because they knew their story and their impact, and they knew they fit both categories of that foundation. There were also exponential effects of doing this work and helping them build this case. They were able to poll some of this information and put it into their grant writing. They had these statistics that they could pull. They knew the change they were making. So it not only helped in grant writing, but also in those funder conversations where they knew they were really confident in their impact, which then led to more dollars. But other areas that were unexpected was they were actually able to share some of these impacts with constituents. So when they held their programs, they were able to say, these are some of the changes that we are hearing from you or people like you. And that helps the people that are attending the programs really resonate because it's true, it's what people saw, it's what a wider variety of people saw based on that research. And it also built confidence with staff. Staff was able to tell one story. It didn't matter who was, if someone was having a conversation with a board member or out on a luncheon doing a presentation, they were able to tell that story and feel really good because they knew it was happening because of the research and and pulling it together in the story really helped them see how they were making a difference. So I just wanted to close by going through some of the steps just of impact storytelling. Grab a little more water here. So this is how I help my clients walk through this process, because it can be a little scary when you don't, you know, you're making an impact, but you don't really know how to measure it, how to tell that story to bigger funders. So let me break it down. We start by articulating your impact hypotheses. Um, and this is an area where, you know, you think you know the change you're making, and you may already know too. But when we can just get it on paper, we know where we're starting from. And this is really big to, you know, what impact does your staff see happening? The people that are on the ground working with the people you serve, as well as what impacts will support your mission. So sometimes we can see changes being made, but it doesn't really connect back with our mission. We want to try to gather all that information because, again, the idea is to tell a story. And if we have two kind of opposing things, it's not really going to help our story. This will clarify what keeps your organization from measuring these impacts, including what other factors such as the environment, misinformation may need to be taken into account. And this is where, you know, again, it can be really hard to measure impacts that are long term, again, because they have a lot of factors that are outside your organization. So we get real about like what can you actually claim um, you know, your organization is doing and changing versus, you know, something that might change in someone's lives that is partially to do with the work you're doing, partially to do with their support at home, other things going on. We just want to get real about that because, you know, you can't fake it. You got to tell an honest story here about what's going on. And then we also define what expectations funders may have for impact to determine gaps. So just like I mentioned with that domestic violence example, funders didn't really know what the difference of getting someone into a hotel room versus, you know, an extended living facility means. And so we have to sort of start to think about, you know, what do people think is supposed to happen so that you can find those gaps to help educate people. An example that always comes to mind is, you know, like people often think, oh, you know, there's someone homeless, they need a lunch, they need food, when really there's so many bigger things going on in that person's life that and their day-to-day experience is so many hurdles to housing and all these other things that if we don't sort of start to see the gaps between what someone expects our organization to do and what that problem actually is, we miss an opportunity to educate them and help them really see our story. So when you do this and articulate that or your full impact hypothesis, you'll be able to look at your impact story more holistically. Then we go out and create and measure impacts. We learn from your constituents to discover how they view your organization's impact. So that involves objectively hearing from clients, members, or constituents. You know, this can be through focus groups, through videos, interviews, phone calls, and really working to hear their voices and what sort of patterns we can find in the impacts that they think and feel. We then align their language with your organization's mission and short to long-term outcomes. So this is really important because, again, you might not have gotten them that job, but you did give them the confidence, the skills, whatever it might be. And so to hear from constituents about what they felt like you really helped them with and got them to those outcomes is important because we want to be really clear about the change you're making because that helps you improve your measurement of it because people identify with that language. We then measure these constituent-centered impacts to really figure out the depth and breadth of what's happening. And when you do this, you'll be able to show the value you bring to your community. Because what we're really trying to do is help those donors and foundations connect to the people you serve, almost pass through what you're doing to connect them with that impact you're making and you are affecting. But they're really not supporting your organization. They're supporting that change that's being made. And the more you can connect them with that change and the people whose lives are changing, the better. That, that not only hits the heartstrings, but also, it makes sense. It's how you want your money to be used. So we then take all that information and build a layered story. And one thing I bring up a lot, a lot of times in storytelling, people talk about, tugging those emotional heartstrings, really being emotional with what you're doing. And I think more of that is used when you're doing general donors, when you're doing emails and direct mail campaigns. But as we get into major donors, they need more of that impact information. They need a connection to those you serve. They need to understand the complexity of the situation, and they need to know the numbers. These are often business people, people with money that need to make monetary decisions. And so to be able to have more of that impact information, um, balanced with a bit of emotional storytelling is important as you increase those dollar donations. So building that layered story really involves including the 5 elements that I spoke about. They don't necessarily have to be in that particular order, but being able to show your work, tell the context of your work, what's unique to your organization, being able to share some of the data and the voices of the people that you serve, helps you tell a layered story and helps someone answer why your organization, and how can they help. When you do this, you'll be able to confidently share your story with larger funders, and be able to, answer their objections before they even are able to ask them. So as we wrap up, if struggling to define your organization's impact might represent a bigger problem, because showing impact is hard. And you might need a new method for determining impact, because there's outside factors that affect your mission, maybe racist or biased systems you fight against, that might even be increasing right now. And there might be misinformation from other stories that affect how a funder might view your work. So you're an expert at what you do. Your team is an expert. You understand program development, big data gathering. You know best practices within your sector. You can learn from the past. You're able to see what's worked and hasn't worked in the past, and you know all the terms and methods that your sector uses to describe your work. But you might need to look more and lean more into your community knowledge. When I say community, that's really the people you serve, partners that you have, people who big stakeholders. But there's real change they see and feel that might be missing from your expert knowledge. They may also be able to, they have the knowledge of what supports or gets in the way of your mission. As an expert, you can drive forward your mission, but sometimes there are things that are happening in your community that can prevent it from being smooth. Maybe there's too many forms, or people can't figure out how to get to a program at the right time. Those kind of things. That community knowledge can really help leverage your impact as well. And your community knowledge also shows the human side of what's happening. A lot of times when we think of data, we start to get a little clinical. And if we can show the human side of what people are thinking and feeling, what change they feel is important to them, that helps you tell the human side of your story and what impact you're making. So you and your team might feel confident in supporting your community through day-to-day tasks at a high level, knowing the inputs and outputs of your work and what you're doing and what sort of is the result of that. But thinking through the ideal outcomes and strategy and changes you want to see in your community. But if you don't take the time to listen, you won't understand the real outcomes and impacts you're making. You won't see the opportunities to increase that impact, and you aren't able to connect potential funders directly with your constituents. So my last slide, if you have a takeaway, listen to your community to see your impact from their perspective. think about ways to measure smaller steps to larger impact when that impact seems too big and hard to measure, and tell a multifaceted story in your case for support. So with that, I want to thank you for taking time on your Thursday to listen to me, and see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I would absolutely ask that anybody put questions in the Q&A if there's anything you want to ask Emily. And I think it's really interesting too, Emily. You know, one of the things that I feel like since COVID in particular, we're all running so fast and furious. And I think that some organizations in trying to do, you know, fit it all in a daily basis, we might overlook that listening. And I think there's just so much that you talked about today and how you can pull out so much value from that listening. And the other thing that I really think is so incredibly important, that you talked about, right, is the consistency of the message. When you invest the time and the energy and the resources into this whole, you know, process of storytelling, to really be able to have consistency, not just with your staff, but even with your board. So many times people are telling different stories or different perspectives of a story. So, and I always think you need to customize it and kind of, you know, be able to have that personal testimony, if you will, but the core story, right? Like there should always kind of be
Mm-hmm.
some common threads that get woven in, don't you think?
Oh yeah, and I mean I'm a board member myself, and so a lot of times we're asked to call a potential donor or ask our friends, and if I think about right now, that board would probably tell 10 different stories with 10 different board members, and you do need to connect the story to the interests of the donor. But yeah, when you don't have that core, like what impact are we making, and having everyone tell that same story, it doesn't give you the confidence that you need to really convince someone to support it when you don't have that data and that story, and knowing that other people are sharing that same story. We think about all the touch points it takes to get people to buy a product. It's the same here. You're like, if people are hearing different stories coming from different people within your organization, it dilutes the message.
We do have a question that's come in. The but section is great. Are you able to share a few specific examples to help us differentiate? And I think that goes back to one of your early slides on the outputs,
Like
not
outputs
measuring.
versus in, impact.
Yeah, I think that that's a really, I found that slide very interesting and like, aha.
Yeah, and it's tricky. And this is where, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with logic models, because I think they can really help you clarify your inputs, your outputs, your outcomes, your impact. And so really outcomes and impacts, I think can blend together a little bit. But and definitely, Paula, let me know if this answers your question, if we have the right slides. But an output might be that, you know, 20 people attend your program monthly, or 150 people receive backpacks, or kids receive backpacks, getting ready for school. But an output or impact are going to be more, what was that change that was made? And this is where I think it gets a little tricky. So I'm just going to riff on the backpack example. Um, you know, does a kid feel more confident going into school? Does a parent feel, have they felt better prepared, or saved some, they may have saved some money to spend on other things in their household. They may, feel like their kid is a normal kid going into school. That it would, a long-term impact might be that if this is done consistently, that a kid can be better prepared and attend more schooling, or be more present and different in their school year. Sorry, better attendance is what I'm trying to say. Um, but those are things that are hard to measure, and so those outcomes can be smaller, in terms of what people are thinking and feeling, and how you're changing their lives on a short-term basis. And then those long-term impacts are going to start to get a little out of your control. But when you can stay in touch with those families, see how their lives are changing, um, then that's something that you can measure long term. So I don't know if that was the best example there, but Paula, did that answer your question?
Uh,
Yes. All right.
yeah. Good, 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 good. I think it's interesting too, right? Like I had not thought about the feeling side of it. I had not thought about going deeper into kind of that psychological benefit on so many levels. As you said that today, I felt like there were 3 organizations I'm thinking of. I'm like, ooh, they need to tap into that. And it is interesting too, because I feel like some of that might also kind of be information that builds on each other year over year too, right? I think to see the consistency in some of those results, and I think it's an excellent piece to weave into our storytelling.
Yeah, and I think those are things, especially when someone can attribute it to your organization. I think that's what gets trickier is, when you might get someone placed in a job, but are they going to keep that job? Is it really leveling up their life? Um, those are things that might be out of your control. But when, like I was saying, as an example, when you give someone the confidence and the knowledge that they can get a job, that's real impact. It might not be what we typically think of in terms of the impact numbers, but you know, being able to being able to empower people, really can only be measured through feelings and perspectives. And so I think those things are really important to measure as well.
That's wonderful. Well, that does bring us to time today. I'd love to give a huge thank you to Emily for being with us this morning and sharing these great insights. And Emily, I'm so excited that you have this workbook that we can also share with people, or guidebook, as you called it. And just thank you for joining us this morning. I hope everybody was able to take away a couple of really great nuggets, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Melissa.
Anytime. Bye.